Do you work with your spouse in ministry, or maybe you're just considering it? Shared leadership among spouses can be tricky territory. So today we're interviewing Taylor and Spencer Osborn, who share leadership of their high school ministry. They're going to walk us through the potential pitfalls, landmines, and red flags, and ultimately how to do it with health and integrity so it's a win for your marriage and your ministry.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Ministry Coach Podcast. My name is Jeff Lascola. I'm here as always with Kristen Lascola, who always says her name every time I say it now.
Because I don't need you to say my name. I can say
I'm a woman and I can hear me roar or whatever. All right. So
nerd alert.
Today we've got some really awesome guests, possibly the funniest couple you will ever meet in your entire life, unless you already know them.
Whether they mean to or not. They're hilarious.
Spencer and Taylor Osborn, the high school pastors at the Fallbrook North Coast Church campus. How are you guys doing?
So good.
So good, guys.
Thank you for your introduction.
Yes, and thank you for having us.
Can you tell we're hilarious?
Yeah, I was trying to come up with a joke because I feel like there's pressure to be funny and I couldn't. So I let the awkward silence.
It's okay. They'll find out soon enough how funny you are, okay? But actually, so not only are they the high school pastors, but so their role is kind of unique in that Taylor is, well, and I should say Taylor is the girl because you both have names that are like...
They're gender neutral names.
Ambidextrous names. So Taylor serves as the associate pastor and the associate high school pastor at the Fallbrook campus of North Coast Church, and Spencer is our high school pastor. So she has kind of a unique role dipping in two different leadership pots, I guess. And then the reason we're having them on today is because there are a lot of couples that work together in ministry. Taylor and Spencer, they are both full-time. They both work at the same campus. They both work in the same team. Their desks, we work in an open office, but their desks are literally, I think, 3 feet apart. And so they're together a lot, whether it's at work and then they, go home. And Jeff and I were talking, we're like, man, we would love to just talk about what is it like to work in ministry with your spouse, maybe like what the challenges have been, what have the successes been. And if anyone who's listening works closely with their spouse, this is going to be a great listen just for the advice of like, how do we do this well? How do we do this healthy? Because Taylor and Spencer still really like each other. And
so far, so good.
Days we do. Yeah.
Very much so.
How long have you guys both been at the Fallbrook campus?
So we have both been there. Well, you started a little before me,
Hold on.
but about 2 years.
2.5 years.
Oh, okay. Seems like it's longer than that.
Obviously you guys, you met working at a camp together, but you didn't work that closely. I have a feeling like your roles, the way you guys have described it in the past, it was like we crossed paths, but we weren't like working on projects together. And so now like being at this campus together, working together on projects and camps and making decisions together, walk us through a little bit. What has it been like working that closely with your spouse and maybe some of the big things like how you guys make decisions together and where that rub has come and how you guys have kind of navigated that?
Good question. So we were kind of set up for success here because like you said, we actually met doing ministry before we were anything romantic. So we've never known not working together, if that makes any sense. Like we were coworkers before we were a married couple. And even working for the church, we both worked for the church before we got married. And then shortly after we got married, transferred into even closer working circumstances. So we were set up for success in the sense that we have always kind of known how to work side by side together. But I think a big thing for us has been the balance of just keeping those lives separate, which is in ministry in general is really, really tricky, but especially as a spouse, keeping that relationship at home totally separate from the relationship at work, where it's really easy to let the things that maybe affect you at home, you might want to bring them in to work, but then, there are other people in that office that shouldn't be punished because they work with a married. So definitely a balance, I would say, has been one of the hardest learning curves for us.
And like she said, right from the beginning, even before we met each other, we were both pursuing vocational ministry independent from each other. And so when we did get to work together in a ministry setting, we were able to actually build a friendship and then eventually a dating relationship on a foundation of both of us having a heart for ministry and responding to a call to vocational ministry. And so that was a known thing for the entire time that we were dating, for our entire engagement, and now our marriage. We've just been building on that foundation of both of us independent from each other, having a heart for ministry, having different skill sets that we bring to the table with that. And I think that made it a lot easier for us. And if we could give advice to couples who are either pursuing ministry together or who are in ministry together, regardless of where you are currently in the journey, maybe to take a moment to step back and really assess and determine, are both of us being called to ministry? Is ministry something that the both of us have a heart for? Or is it something that just one of us has a heart for, and I want to be supportive as a spouse, and I want to be excited about what you're excited about? I think it's important to do that, because that can certainly be draining if one of you has a very clear calling and very clearly has a heart for ministry, and the other one's just kind of trying to be supportive, because ministry can definitely be a drain on you physically, emotionally, spiritually. So be real with yourselves, be honest with yourselves as to whether that call to ministry is to one of you, or if it in actuality is to both of you.
So that's a great question. So say it is for both of you, and both of you, because like you guys and some other couples I've known, you guys are two highly passionate, highly motivated, highly capable, big L, high capacity leaders. Like there's not like one of you who's like in the shadow, and there's not one of you who's like, hey, I'm kind of like, I'm leader one and I'm leader two. Like you guys are both like that 1A leader, like in the driver's seat types. Have you guys experienced the power struggle, or how do you yield to one another when you're making decisions and one of you wants to go left and one of you wants to go right, and it's at this stalemate of like, who knows best? And how does that submission and decision making intertwine? Because I have a feeling whatever happens at the office, like Taylor, you were saying, it's hard because then you bring it home and it's like, can we leave work tension at work and then we come home? But how does that work in terms of the power struggle?
So I think one of the big, like if I were going to give advice to a couple that was considering working together, a couple things that I would prompt them with is, one, you guys need to be really truthful with each other and with yourselves about whether or not this is something you can handle, because it's not for everyone. And I don't say that to toot our horns. I mean, some couples, frankly, thrive on the fact that they don't see each other all the time. And so when they get to come back together, it's like really solid relational time that they're able to have together. And then some couples are able to thrive on, we see each other all the time, and that's okay with us. We don't drive each other crazy, usually. And so if you fall in that latter category, okay, great. Maybe you're cleared for working together. But the second caveat there would be, you have to be really honest with yourself and each other about what your strengths and weaknesses are. Yeah. And you need to let the other person help point out those blind spots for you and places of growth. But as soon as you have developed that skill together and you guys can kind of distinguish between where it makes the most sense for maybe one of you to take lead and the other person to take a step back. A really practical example I see of that is in our relationship, I am much more numbers minded than he is. So he can be big picture and he can oversee a lot at one time. And I'm much more laser focused on like what's happening day to day, which works well because those things pair well together, but they can also create a lot of tension where I'm like, let's stay focused here. And he's like, but what about the big picture? So if it gets down to be a budget question, he will usually defer to me. Mm-hmm. If it gets to be a vision question, I will usually defer to him just based on strengths. So we do our best to avoid those like pitfalls of even having tension points where we can in advance, just by knowing who we are as people and then knowing who the other person is. But that doesn't mean we don't have tension. It just means we are navigating it the best that we can via strengths versus after the fact and dealing with weaknesses, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And just as with anything in marriage, I think communication is always key. And it's not just about communicating expectations in the beginning when you're first starting out with doing ministry together, but it's your expectations and your preferences are allowed to change, and your ideas and your mindset is allowed to change, but you need to continue to communicate those expectations. You need to continue to communicate how you're doing, where you're at. And just like what Taylor was saying, it's so healthy to have an awareness of what your specific gifts are, but also different areas, maybe blind spots or weaknesses. That's where a spouse can come in and kind of reveal those blind spots that you can have in ministry that you're not very much aware of. I think what's great about the dynamic that you can have as a married couple is there are blind spots that I have in ministry that I don't see, I'm not aware of, that she is able to lovingly kind of see and correct and bring up and kind of reveal those to me. And it allows me to grow as a leader. It allows me to be able to do ministry so much better than I would be able to do if I was just continuing on doing things the way I thought was best. And so being able to kind of balance each other out with, there's different things that I defer to her judgment on. There are different things that she allows me to kind of take the lead on. But as long as we're communicating that, as long as we're not just either jumping to conclusions or just making assumptions and trying to take things in certain directions, as I admittedly have a tendency to do. I have a tendency to kind of just want to grab the steering wheel and steer the ship. But I need to communicate. All she wants from me is to communicate where I would like to steer the ship. And then she can communicate with me where she thinks we can steer that. So it's constant communication.
Like over communication, like to an annoying level, because of the fact that we're married. It's one thing to communicate with a coworker and grow in frustration with them, but because we can't take it home with us, the communication level just has to outweigh any potential pitfalls that we could find. Absolutely.
Because yes, we are coworkers, but we are husband and wife before that. And if we're putting more intentionality and more attention into our ministries, we're doing it wrong. If our ministry is getting more attention than our marriage is, we're doing things really, really incorrectly.
Yeah. Sorry, Jeff, did you have a question?
Yeah. So when you guys do get home, and let's say, obviously, if there was, huge joys at a midweek service or a Sunday service, I could understand talking about that when you get home and celebrating those things. But when there's maybe some more difficult challenges that come up, how do you help each other, I guess, turn that off and say that's work and that's not going to be touched and we're just going to be our married selves right now? Or do you let it spill into that, and where do you draw the line with that?
Ooh, yeah. And that's good, because particularly when you're in youth ministry, It's not like a 9 to 5 job where you can just leave work at work. You're kind of always on the clock. You're always on call. And that's something that we're very much used to. We're very used to her getting phone calls from some of our girl students, or maybe a leader is giving me a call and needs help with something. So we're very used to that. But I think from the very beginning of our marriage, we also kind of set those very clear boundaries where on those days where maybe they're a little heavy or something like that, we are able to kind of communicate to each other like, hey, I need to not be in work mode right now. And we can relate to each other in that way. Like, I understand what spiritual burnout feels like. I understand what ministry burnout feels like, but that's also one of the biggest joys of doing ministry together is being able to come home at the end of the day and they can relate. They understand what I'm feeling and just like the emotional and spiritual strain that I'm under. Like, she has a very deep understanding of that, and likewise I have a deep understanding of that, and it helps us to empathize with each other as a couple.
So that is a nice perk to it. But I would say we try a couple things. One is, if we're having conflict at work, we resolve it while we're still in the building. So it's not the kind of thing that travels home with us silently in the car, in the back seat, and then we get home and we unpack it, because then it's here. Then, there's not a great way to distinguish it.
Yeah.
So if we're having any type of like just battle between the two of us, leadership is kind of, rubbing heads or whatever it might be, we do our best to deal with it while we're still in the building. And then the other thing is we try our best, and this isn't always easy, but I would say we do a pretty good job of this. We don't talk work as soon as we're home. So like you said, Jeff, there are times when you want to celebrate and you want to take that time to lift each other up as spouses. Like, hey, you did something in your career separate from even me. Proud of you. Good job with what you did. But when it comes to either the like to-do list stuff or, hey, I was thinking maybe we could do this, our general good rule of thumb is if a different coworker wouldn't be approached about this right now at 9:00 at night, it's not something we're going to talk about. So you can put a note in your phone. You can talk about it tomorrow. Sometimes we'll say, hey, can I mention something work related to you really quick? And the other person has that full ability to say, no, thank you. Like, I'm already dealing with enough trouble coming home and being home, not tonight. And it's like, all right, well, great.
And we never take that personally.
That's not personal. That's just like
not at all.
If I wouldn't shoot our admin an email at 10:30 at night to give her my quick thoughts on something, I don't need to tell it to him either. So we try our best to compartmentalize where we can as well.
You brought up something interesting before too, and I hadn't thought about it. I could see where you don't want to bring work home with you because for all the reasons you said, but you said you also can't bring what's at home to work. And I mean, that could be with anybody if they're dealing with something, even if their spouse isn't there, but you guys are both there. So how do you then flip that switch and go from, we had a heated conversation all last night and this morning, and now we're at work and we're coworkers that, how do you make that switch then?
Yeah. So that's definitely a tougher one to learn. And that's something that we had to kind of learn and develop. And we've gotten to the point, something that's great about working at a church is if something happens, let's say in the morning or something, if we're really peeved at each other for something that happened, we want to be intentional and make sure that we're not bringing that to the workplace. And so we'll resolve that at home, even if it means we're getting to work late. Because it's like, hey, we'll get work done later, but we can't go to work angry at each other and then just be in an office upset and allowing that to just kind of fester, because then that's going to affect how we work together in the office, in ministry. And so we are very intentional with it. When something comes up, we deal with it. Like, we sit down, we hash it out, we have the conversation. We apologize where apologies are necessary. Sometimes it's just a miscommunication thing, but we would so much rather get it out of the way right then and there than let that wound fester throughout the day and, heaven forbid, carry on into the next day. We're very intentional about not being upset with each other for more than like 12 hours.
Couple hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it helps a lot that neither of us are really emotional people. If either one of us was a feeler, like a hard feeler, it would be much more difficult to leave that kind of thing at home. Because there have been times where we don't have the luxury of time. We can't always solve it and then go into work, in which case you just have to decide, like, it is not, again, we're not going to punish the people that work in the office with us, that they work with a married couple, by going in and being less than what we would be if we worked separately. Like, you're not going to show up to an office building somewhere else, you know, separate from your spouse, but you guys had a tiff this morning and you're just going to be grumpy gills all day, and people are going to be like, oh, I guess we'll deal with that. That's fine.
Yeah.
You know, so
you know how awkward that is?
It is. It's super awkward.
Yeah.
So part of it is like a protectiveness for the people we work with, that we're able to respect them enough that even if there were something between us, the goal is that nobody knows the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can see you guys do a great job with that. And, you know, a lot of the things that you're saying, I can see like them in practice. Like, I feel like you guys are very considerate of one another, and a lot of give and take and compromise and teamwork. And you know, it's funny, like when I sit in meetings, like with the rest of our student ministry, Spencer, I don't know if you've like heard this topic come up, but almost all of them, especially like our senior pastor, he says, I could never work with my spouse ever. I think that you guys, and the way that you do it and the health that you have is rare. And Taylor, in the beginning, you said like, hey, like this isn't for everybody. And it seems like it takes a lot of intentionality, a lot of communication, and a lot of compartmentalization, which is sometimes, doozy. Easier said than done. You know, like a lot of this can be theory, like, hey, make sure you're not bringing stuff home and compartmentalize. But like Taylor, like you were saying, but at the end of the day, emotions are emotions. And if you're a highly emotional person and you're a feeler and it's hard for you to let stuff go and you can't tell where the marriage and the work end and begin, you know, those are some real like hard questions that you would want to do some heart work on. Like, is this the best for us? Because this isn't common. B, it's not easy. And C, it could either damage a really good marriage or a really good work thing, you know, and which would be a tragedy to lose either one or to damage either one. And so I think you guys really nailed it of like compartmentalizing if you're able to. You know, those are things that people say, but it's like, can you? Because if you're still like mad at them all the time. So like, as we wrap up, just one more question. What would you guys say are some dead giveaways of like, this is a red flag? If we get into this mode, we need to start pulling the e-brake. If this kind of communication starts happening, we need to pull the e-brake. Like, what are those like landmines out there of like, hey, you're treading in some dangerous water if you start getting into what?
Yeah. So 2 things initially came to mind, and maybe you'll have different ones. I would say the first thing that came to mind when you said that is people want to pit mom and dad against each other a little bit. So especially working with students, if you find that your spouse is under communicating, so like I said, with students in particular, they're going to one of you to get a response for something and they get the answer that they don't want. And so they go to the other person to get a response. If there is any divide between you at all, students especially will find it. But even you'd be surprised how often that kind of thing can happen in just the workplace setting, where if there is something that is is sitting between your ability to communicate to each other, it's going to be very obvious to everybody else. So if you guys are dealing with some sort of, you're giving an answer and the other person isn't getting that like end all be all communication courtesy, which is, hey, so-and-so approached me, they wanted an answer for this, I made a judgment call, this is what I said. It's hard as the spouse to hear it from somebody else saying, oh, he told me it was okay if we borrowed your blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that's very interesting because nobody mentioned this to me. So I'd say that's definitely a red flag situation. And shoot, what was my other one? I just had one. I forgot it.
Okay. Well, I'll give one of my, I think I have two as well. So
Okay.
I'll give at least one of mine. I think just a big lesson that we've always lived by and have adamantly coached our volunteers through is the idea of living above reproach. And that's just the idea of going above and beyond what you would consider to be necessary to making sure that you can never be put in a situation where your integrity or your character could be called into question. And particularly when you are working together as a married couple in ministry, like not allowing there to be any second guessing of just how solid your commitment to each other is, not allowing there to be any sort of just not allowing yourself to be in any sort of situation where you could even be accused of something. Because one of our leaders in the very early on in ministry really taught us, when you're in ministry, you're not one incident away from losing your ministry. You're one accusation away from losing your ministry. And you're as a married couple, you are one accusation away from losing a very big part of what you get to do together. And that's something that you need to keep in mind. And for that reason, we have very specific, very like hard lines in the sand that we have to draw to make sure that we're not ever allowing ourselves to be in a situation where our character could be called into question. And that goes just as far as, meeting with either leaders or students of the opposite gender privately. There is no situation where it would be appropriate for Taylor to meet with a male student or a male leader solo, and there's no reason why she would need to meet with a male student or leader just the two of them. And there's no reason I would have to meet with a female student or leader by myself. And that's a great reason why our dynamic works out so well, where she's able, like, if there's a female leader or student who needs something, I'm able to send them to her, and likewise she's able to just defer the guys to me, because we don't want to allow for any speculation. We want people to know that we are solid, that we have very strict rules that we follow, that we expect our leaders to follow too, because as in ministry, we are not called to a higher standard. We're not. I think something that Chris Brown says is we're not called to a higher standard, but we are called to a higher consequence, if that makes sense.
Yeah, he always says we're not held to a higher standard. We're held to the same standard, but more strictly. So
exactly.
We're under a microscope the second we have that platform. Yeah, for sure.
We have more to lose.
Absolutely.
I finally remembered my second point.
Go for it.
Okay. So what I was going to say, another red flag would be sometimes coworkers will want to approach whichever of you they are more comfortable with to discuss something that should be handled by the other person. And that has to be a really hard line in the sand as well. So you receive no special spiritual prize for working with your spouse. And I think people glorify it like it is this like, wow, I can't believe you guys are in ministry and you work together. Like, how do you do that? And it's like, well, I mean, that's how we met. So it's a little bit how this even came to be, was us working in ministry together.
Mhm.
But as people grow to know you individually as people, sometimes they will decide which one of you they would rather discuss. So from time to time, somebody will come to me like, I sent Spencer an email, and I have to be like, I'm going to stop you right there. I can't help you with that. I am not his keeper. I am his wife, but that is irrelevant to the email because that's work related.
Mhm.
You don't need me for that. So I would say another red flag to look out for would just be making sure that you are never operating on behalf of your spouse without them in a way that inhibits their leadership. Like if they're having trouble getting a hold of Spencer via email in any other workplace where I wasn't there, their job would be to in person approach them and say, hey, I sent you an email, I never heard back, so doing your best also not to handicap your spouse, which can be even as difficult, I would say, as setting them up for success. So that was my second one.
Yeah. And I think my last one, and I don't know if people might disagree with me on this, but if you are ever prioritizing your ministry over your marriage in any capacity, you're doing it wrong and you're doing ministry ineffectively. I would rather have, you don't have to be in vocational ministry to do ministry effectively. I would rather do ministry effectively by having a healthy marriage and being focused on that than having a alive and thriving ministry or church and then having a really rocky marriage because I'm not pouring the same amount of love and attention into that. And if I'm valuing the approval of people in the ministry over the approval of my spouse, I'm doing things wrong, because in the end, God is the one who ultimately wants the glory in your ministry as well as in your marriage, in your relationship. He gets the glory in both of those things. And if he's only getting the glory in one of those things, or heaven forbid, if he's not getting glory in either of those things, those are huge red flags. So if you find yourself getting all the glory in your ministry, you're doing it wrong, for sure. There's a spouse that's being neglected, and there is a God that's being neglected.
Preach, preach.
That's good stuff. Thank you, guys.
I don't know if anyone would disagree with you on that. And if they do,
You said that, and I thought I would hope everybody would agree with that.
I don't know. I feel like I've met some people where they're like, no, my calling to ministry comes before that. And I'll every time I'll be like, no.
Those people exist. You're right.
They do.
Yeah.
They do. Real. And if you disagree with me,
boo.
call me. Call me. We'll chat, and I'll tell you why you're wrong to your face.
Well, thanks so much. I want to ask you guys one more question. Totally off topic, but just a fun way to end for anybody that we're interviewing on the podcast. If you guys were to say what your number one pet peeve is, what would you say it is?
People who aren't from New York who wear New York Yankees hats.
Wildly specific.
How do you know I'm not from New York?
Oh my gosh, I didn't even notice. I was like, oh, that's funny.
Wow,
Wait, are you-
what a weirdo.
Are you from New York?
No.
Long Beach does not have any sports teams that I know of.
Hey, at least it's not a Dodgers hat.
Ooh, Dodgers fans out there. Uh-oh. We love you.
I
You like
thought
us.
of one actually immediately when you said this question, and it's not even my top pet peeve.
Are you
but
talking like
I'm going to share it.
pet peeve in ministry, or
No, this
Just
is
in-
just life.
just
not
getting to
in
know
ministry.
us a little better?
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So I have this pet peeve where
Are you gonna hurt my feelings?
probably no.
All right.
When you're driving down the road, right, and there's just one lane, and there's someone waiting to make a right into your lane, and you see them from like a distance, like way back there, you see them, and you think that person's gonna wait until after I pass by
Mm-hmm.
to turn out onto this road.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, no, they do not. They turn out onto the road shortly before you're about to rear end them.
Yeah.
That drives me nuts.
She gets very.
I get
upset.
so upset
She
about
does.
that.
Yeah, it's another good one.
And it's usually when there's nobody behind you.
Yep.
So they could have waited.
Yeah. I wonder that too, of like, did you see like how many cars were behind me? There were 0. So you would have had all the time. Like you could have done it, like, and taken your time. It would have been okay.
Bunch of losers.
Bunch of losers.
Drives me crazy.
I think a literal pet peeve of mine are pets on the furniture. I can't,
Really?
I can't like I don't like dog hair on.
Does anybody like
I
dog
don't.
hair?
I don't like I like dogs. I love dogs. I love pets. I don't understand the rationale of pets on the couch, in the bed.
Wow.
I can't wrap my
Okay,
head
but it's
around.
because you like big dogs, right? If you had a little dog, like a
No, I'm
baby
fine with all
dog.
dogs. I'm fine with all of them.
Just not their hair.
But if they have fur that detaches from their body in any capacity, they don't belong on my human furniture. Like,
I disagree.
like get out.
What do you do when you
You're-
find Taylor's hairs around the house? Like on the couch or in the shower? Does it just
less
like
of them.
Yes.
Barely.
But
less of them.
Yeah, but she contributes in other ways, in so many ways,
I
to the
pay
relationship,
bills
Okay.
to the house. She bought most of the stuff in the house. What did the dog buy? When the dog buys the couch, he can sit on the couch. Until then, let your dog. You don't belong on the furniture. And I just when I walk into somebody's house and there's fur on the furniture, I won't sit down. You'll start noticing it now.
Just
If we
stand in
ever
the
go to
corner.
people's houses, I won't sit.
Spencer, I thought you were going to say, okay, so we'll end here, but this is so weird. Spencer will not share dairy.
I thought
So-
that might be the big deal.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
That's
I thought this was going to be his pet peeve because, like, he will share food, but if the food happens to be a dairy product, he will not share it. So we went out to ice cream and he got mango sorbet. And I said, "Can I have a bite?" And he said, "No." I said, "Spencer, it's sorbet." And he goes, "No, it's too close to ice cream." Like he won't share.
But that's not so much a pet peeve as much as that's just a quirk.
Okay.
It's like
That's true.
I know.
That's
I
true.
never
It is more of a
think
quirk.
of that as a pet peeve because pet peeves, for the most part, I'm like, it's kind of annoying. That's like a weird mental block that I've had since I was a kid. There's something like deeply.
I'm gonna Google
psychologically-
that.
I think I was traumatized by like a cow, something. I saw a cow that just like gave me the stink eye or something, and ever since then, I just can't. I don't know what it is.
Maybe you
And
should go
I'm
vegan.
sorry about that one time. You will not let that go.
It's so weird to me that it's like if you said, "No, I don't share food," I'm like, yeah, okay, he doesn't like germs, I get it.
Yeah.
But the fact that you will share all food except dairy food is weird.
Anything you can I'll take the food out of your mouth and I will have it.
Yeah, not a jerk.
But with like
Not about
ice
the germs.
cream, yogurt, milkshakes, any like dairy based I won't do it.
He's a
as
strange
soon-
human.
And it's happened before. I've had people like take a bite of my ice cream when I wasn't paying attention and I look back and then I can't eat it.
And then
Like I
it's done.
can't enjoy it.
It's
I'm like,
garbage.
well, you might as well just take the rest of it because I'm not going to eat it. So
Sully,
I
that
I
bowl
don't
of
know.
ice cream.
There's something psychologically going on there
I'm
that,
gonna look it
I
up
don't care to explore.
because I bet you're not the only person that has that. So I have to
Yeah,
know.
we've met at least one other person that had this weird thing
They have
We
like
should
a
put it
slight
in
aversion
therapy.
to it.
and see what the therapist
I should
says.
develop like a support group. A support group. We'll all sit in our different chairs drinking our milkshakes, not sharing anything.
Hey, yeah, if you're socially distanced,
It'll be
nobody
great.
is even nearby enough
Yeah.
to take it from you.
Yeah. It comes in handy though. Like case in point, that situation, I don't have to share my ice cream.
You don't. You don't. And no pressure. It's just weird. That's all.
You be you.
You say no pressure, but you pressure me every time we get ice cream together.
That she knows. Well, what a great place to end. So the things
I'm
we
gonna go
learned,
eat
but
some ice cream.
besides co-leading with your spouse in ministry, don't share dairy with Spencer. Don't pull out your car in front of Taylor, and also don't have your pets on furniture. That's just rude. So anyways, thank you guys for being on the show. Thank you guys for listening and watching this, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for checking out this episode. We hope that it provided a ton of insight for you to create health in yourself, your ministry, and your church.
And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the Ministry Coach podcast wherever you're watching or listening. And it would mean so much to us if you would rate and review this show on Apple Podcasts.
And we'd also encourage you to share it with a friend so that it can go to help more people. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.